Welcome to Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs' .commentary. The announcement was delivered as usual with ceremony and certainty. From the White House podium, the president's voice echoed across a room filled with cameras and applause. We will impose 100% tariffs to stop Chinese planes from flying to Russia. The statement was delivered as a verdict, not just a policy, but a declaration of strength. For the world, it was another headline in an age of economic warfare. It would be something else entirely, a new chapter in the long story of how nations confuse control with purpose. When politics forgets its humanity, it begins to regulate the winds, not with the mechanics of trade or the technical details of taxation, but with the symbolism of the sky itself, once the common frontier of humanity, now another instrument of division. For centuries, flight has been our most poetic achievement, the conquest of gravity itself. But in the modern age, even the sky has been usurped, circumscribed, and taxed. It is no longer a realm of wonder, it is a battlefield. Banning planes, erecting economic barriers in the air is the ultimate expression of political fear. The 100% tariff is not about planes or tariffs. It is about visibility. It says, we can reach even here. It is power asserting itself in the only language it now remembers, exclusion. Dominating the earth is not enough. Now we must dominate the air. From the age of empires claiming the oceans to the superpowers claiming orbit, each era finds new ways to mark out territory to make the infinite finite. He argues that the U.S. tariffs on Chinese aircraft are a response not to Russia or Beijing, but to itself, to the anxiety of a nation losing faith in its moral authority. Control without cooperation is fragility disguised as strength. Theater of power depends on the illusion that the skies can be conquered. Then there's China caught between partnership and pragmatism, Russia isolated and angry, the United States desperate to remind itself that it still controls the weather. In this proud triangle, diplomacy has no air to breathe. The scene comes to life, an airplane parked on an empty runway, its national flag flapping in a wind that belongs to no one. Above, clouds drift freely, indifferent, borderless, moral. The sky does not divide us. It only reflects how divided we have become. The irony, of course, is cruel. In trying to close the sky to its adversaries, America is also closing the sky to itself, because what once symbolized freedom now reflects fear. And fear, Sachs warns, is the true architect of the decline of every empire. The sky remains open. Only our minds can learn to close it. In Washington, this policy sounds formulaic, clear, technical, precise. 100% tariffs on Chinese planes flying to Russia. It fits perfectly into the bureaucratic vocabulary of 21st century governance, targeted, strategic, rational. But I see something else behind the spreadsheets and statements, not strategy, but anxiety, not control, but fatigue. Confiscation is not a policy. It is the confession of an empire that no longer knows how to lead. The image of a government sitting at a desk, drawing up rules that promise to tame chaos. Bureaucrats call it leverage, economists call it deterrence, but Sachs would call it what it is, an isolating machine. Each sanctioned tariff or tax is another brick in the wall of fear of being seen as irrelevant America. Once the architect of cooperation now measures its power by how much it obstructs. The irony. In the name of global order, it multiplies chaos. In the pursuit of security, it creates new insecurities. The 100% tariffs on Chinese aircraft are not merely an act of accommodation. They are the ritual of a civilization that has forgotten the meaning of connection. The stronger the wall, the weaker what is hidden behind it. This dynamic is rooted in the psychology of modern empires, the obsession with containment, the suspicion of balance. For them, isolation becomes purity, the illusion that by severing ties, one can cleanse oneself of compromise. But Sachs insists diplomacy has never been about purity. It is about coexistence, the difficult but necessary art of living with imperfection. Yet Washington's language has become allergic to subtlety. It demands enemies, not partners. It thrives on certainty, not humility. Every policy designed to defend principle is, in fact, a defense against weakness, against the recognition that interdependence is not a defect but a reality. The global economy, he said, is not a chessboard of rivals. It is a bloodline. When one country blocks one vein, everyone begins to starve. Taxing the air exposes something deeper than economic aggression. It exposes a civilization exhausted by its own contradictions. The United States still speaks the language of freedom while practicing the logic of fear. Their foreign policy has become passive, their imagination impoverished. Every sanction imposed abroad is an echo of moral paralysis at home. We have confused movement with meaning. We keep the machine running because silence will force us to ask why. And so the machine continues to run automatically, indifferently, relentlessly. Each new act of isolation is justified as necessary, each justification a sign of weakness. Sachs ends with the quiet admission that this illusion cannot last. An empire cannot survive by closing the sky. It can only survive by opening the heart. It began quietly, not with explosions or declarations, but with distance. Diplomats stopped calling, agreements lapsed. Words like dialogue and partnership disappeared from official statements, replaced by security, sovereignty, and self-reliance. Step by step, bridges between nations collapsed, not from bombs, but from indifference. I call this the collapse of cooperation, the slow, invisible disintegration of a world that once believed in the possibility of collective progress. What began as a strategy, a tariff here, a sanction there, a 100% tax on Chinese aircraft, became something much darker, a culture of suspicion disguised as strength. Empires don't end in fire, they end in silence when the habit of cooperation fades into a reflex of suspicion. The moment nations stop believing in the purpose of partnership, globalization once carried a dream that trade could conquer conflict, that trade would bind nations together through shared prosperity. But now every connection is seen as a contagion. Every exchange is a risk. Every conversation is an act of espionage. The skies, once open to the movement of goods, ideas, and people, became the perfect metaphor for this fear. America closed its doors to Chinese planes. China responded with restrictions of its own. Russia tightened its borders. The dream of interdependence died not from resentment, but from exhaustion. Trust is the oxygen of civilization. We are learning what happens when the air is thin. The United Nations after World War I, the walls of the Cold War, and the failed treaties of the early 21st century, each era begins with hope and ends with pride. Each believes it has learned the lessons of the previous one until it repeats them in a different language. The collapse of cooperation is not merely political, it is psychological. It is the withdrawal of empathy from global leadership. Nations become like fearful individuals, withdrawing, hoarding, blaming. And the more they isolate themselves, the more paranoid they become. The architecture of peace is built on a foundation of trust. Once that trust is broken, power moves in to fill the void, and power only knows how to express itself. Performance. In this new world, diplomacy has become theater. Summits are staged to attract attention. Treaties are signed to applause. Leaders speak not to each other, but to domestic audiences, each side promising to protect the other. The negotiating table has become a stage where fear masquerades as strength. Nations that once promised to lead the world are now prisoners of their own pride. Cooperation, he said, is humanity's greatest invention, the only force capable of saving us from ourselves. Its loss is not just political, It is existential. Without cooperation, he said, we survive, but we do not progress. We move, but we do not arrive. The final image is stark, an empty hall, microphones unplugged, flags still hanging. Outside, the wind still blows freely across oceans, across borders, across skies we have learned to close. The world still breathes, but shallowly. The silence feels less like peace than like the stillness before another misunderstanding. Civilization, he said, was never a contest for power. It was a conversation. And we stop talking, disappear. City lights twinkle softly under the clouds, and the distances between nations seem small, almost gentle. That perspective always has a moral, it shows, once expanded, how fragile our divisions really are. Now, after the period of isolation, after tariff bans, and the slow erosion of cooperation, Sachs will ask a simple question: what comes next? Power, he says, can close skies, borders, and hearts, but reason, once awakened, can reopen them. Reason is not calculation, but conscience. In an age when global leadership measures itself by control, reason must mean restraint, the courage to see the world not as a hierarchy of enemies, but as a network of coexistence. The 100% tariff ban on Chinese planes to Russia was never about economics. It was about fear. Fear of being seen as irrelevant, fear of vulnerability, fear of a world where America no longer dominates. But fear cannot dominate forever. It will exhaust itself. And in the ensuing silence, reason, if we allow, it will return. Humility is not weakness. It is wisdom remembering its purpose. This innovation is in unexpected places. In the quiet perseverance of scientists who continue to collaborate across borders regardless of politics, in the Chinese and American students who still study together, learning each other's languages instead of each other's slogans, in the diplomats who off camera continue to negotiate because they still believe that dialogue is sacred. Each of these acts is a small rebellion against cynicism, the beginning of conscience asserting itself in a skeptical age. The return of reason, he said, will not come through policy, but through patience. A new form of global leadership built not on pomp or slogans, but on empathy and resilience. Sachs argues that the world doesn't need another empire. It needs stewards, leaders who can listen, acknowledge uncertainty, and choose cooperation over domination. This isn't idealism, it's realism of the highest kind, because the first law of survival, whether in nature or in nations, is balance, and no nation, however powerful, can thrive in a world it isolates. Power without empathy, he says, is like gravity without light. It pulls, but it cannot lift. As the film ends, the image returns to the open sky, vast, borderless, eternal. Planes fly again, not as symbols of domination, but as bridges connecting worlds. Below, the earth glows divided, yes, but alive with connection. The future will not belong to those who shout loudest, but to those who listen deepest, for in the return of reason lies the only power that endures, the power of caring.